today I kind of wanted to shift the focus a little bit more towards the strategy ArenaNet, in my opinion, is taking to ensure the success of the franchise. If you guys see the gamer news, you guys see it on Reddit. MMOs are closing up. Game companies are reducing their size. So how is ArenaNet responding to the shift in the overall industry to ensure their survival? And I think I have a little bit of an idea about how they're doing it. And if you guys look closely enough, it's all unfolding before our eyes in real time. So without further ado, I think we should get into it. What the heck? Hold on. There we go. So today we're going to be talking about the Guild Wars pipeline. And what is the pipeline, you ask? The Guild Wars pipeline is the business model that ArenaNet is going to attempt in order to ensure the longevity of the Guild Wars series, because the Guild Wars series is the only IP that ArenaNet has. It's not like in other developers where they have multiple IPs that they can work on, what they can develop, and you know that all their eggs is in Guild Wars, right? And that's not a bad thing. But what they're doing is, as you'll see, if you're a Guild Wars fan, it's a great day to be a Guild Wars fan, because we are getting offerings. We are getting content to play. And so, first off, what is the vision? What is the vision ArenaNet is setting forth to attempt? And the number one thing is to expand ArenaNet's portfolio first and foremost. The second thing is to contribute to NCSoft's mobile goals. And so if you're not sure what I'm talking about, in Q1, ArenaNet, or NCSoft rather, posted this article. NCSoft announces 3 core growth strategies, and they have a target for their profits. But if you look, they laid it all out in front of us. Legacy IP, new IP, and mobile casual are the 3 things that ArenaNet is focusing on, or NCSoft, and by proxy, ArenaNet, right? So they announced like, hey, this is what we are gonna do, right? This is what we're gonna focus on. And so the whole goal is to increase their mobile goals, and revitalize their legacy IPs and come out with a new IP, which was Guild Wars 3. And to all wrap it up, at the end of the day is to reach a new audience, capture more of the market segment, expand into new market segments. And so really the question is, how are they going to do this, right? ArenaNet has always kind of had the reputation of being a scrappy, small dev, and expansion didn't seem possible, right? Guild Wars was, for all intents and purposes, in maintenance mode, right? No new things, bug fixes here and there. Yeah, we'd get like the occasional, new event or whatever. Guild Wars 2 has a tumultuous, relationship with its development models, right? We've gone through several at this point where we finally landed on a yearly X-Pack model that is obviously it's successful, like we can see it. And now with Guild Wars 3 and a 4th game, how are we going to handle this workload? Well, that's what we're going to kind of get into. Well, they have individual teams. They talked about it in the live stream that you can go back and watch, but they have individual teams, and they have partnered strategically with other developers to ensure that they can produce and release on all 4 games that they have announced so far. Guild Wars Reforged, Guild Wars 2, Guild Wars 3, and Mistbound, which was a complete surprise on my part. I did not suspect that they would, in any intents and purposes, release the card game. I thought it was kind of a meme when they released the teasers, when we saw the stuff on Steam, but like they are making a card game. There's a caveat that it is only going to be released to the China market, but 4 games expanding the Guild Wars IP, expanding into new market segments, new game modes, and they've strategically partnered with external dev companies to make this happen. So Guild Wars Reforged, right? This was the start of creating this pipeline. What I mean by the pipeline is creating a forwards and backwards model that when one person lands on one game, the games are interconnected, so that way it entices you to want to try those out, right? So Guild Wars Reforged is the first one we're going to start here, right? Guild Wars was essentially it was on life support, no new updates. However, the vision was the progression to mobile, to make Guild Wars on mobile possible. And how do you do that? Well, you know, as an engineer myself, you know, whenever you're embarking on a new feature, you start big and you iterate smaller, right? You work on the big picture items, you get that foundation established, and then you slowly inch forward closer to the end goal. And what was that? What was the iteration? Well, the first thing was getting it prepared and optimized on SteamOS. And if you're not familiar with SteamOS is, it's Steam's Linux gaming operating system. Because if you get it working on SteamOS and you get it running smooth, it works on the Steam Deck. And with the Steam Deck, what does that give you? That gets you controller support. And that was the big thing, right? Getting it working on a controller platform natively, right? The next thing is porting that into mobile. You go one step smaller, and that's what they did. That's what they accomplished. And how do you do that? They talked about it. They had to redesign and recreate a lot of the UI components to fit on a higher resolution screen. You had to also make it work on a smaller screen and also different aspect ratios. Phones inherently are not 16:9. And so in order for Guild Wars to work on mobile, that was the main focus. But that isn't enough to revitalize a game in order to make it a core pillar of your company. And so what did they do? With 2 weeks gaming, they released new content and modes. The first is the Reforged mode. It's not a challenge, right? Gives you some more gold, more XP, but it made things a little easier, right? Reforged mode. So if you're coming into the game, you know, Reforged mode is a really good first starter mode to get used to things. But then they were like, we need to entice and get the end game back. And so they released Melandru's Accord, which is an Iron Man mode, and then Doom's Covenant, which is in all intents and purposes a hardcore mode where if you die, you delete. But these modes were just taking the content that was already existing and having players interact with it in a new way. That's not enough, right? You need to spark confidence in your player base that you guys are serious, right? And so what did they do? They released a new dungeon, the first content release for Guild Wars in years, the Forsaken Tunnels dungeon. And during the live streams, they've announced new content, new modes. And so Guild Wars is here to stay, and it is actively back in development. That means a lot for a over 20-year-old game. It's huge, right? Like, it's almost unprecedented, right? Like we've seen comebacks like this in the MMO space, but like as a Guild Wars fan, it's almost unheard of, right? Like Guild Wars 2 has been in periods where its survival was questionable at best. And for them to be pushing their chips all in is on their entire franchise is incredible to see. And from a business standpoint, it gets me really excited because they're not just satisfied with the status quo. They want to keep pushing the capabilities that they have of all of the games that they have. The next I want to talk about is Guild Wars 2, right? So unfortunately, Guild Wars 2 is taking the biggest hit out of the entire strategy, right? Yes, they are giving us the Hall of Monuments that'll tie into Guild Wars 3, so that way the players in 2027 has goals, have things to do, and as we all wait and get excited for Guild Wars 3. The nice thing is because of them extending the Hall of Monuments, you get it for all tie-ins to all 3 games. You can have the Hall of Monuments in Guild Wars. You do that, you get stuff in Guild Wars 2. You play Guild Wars 2, you do the Hall of Monuments in Guild Wars 2, you get stuff in Guild Wars 3. There is that clear defining pipeline, right? But again, taking the biggest hit, no new content in 2027. We're effectively in a maintenance period, but it doesn't mean that we're not getting anything. We're getting just enough to wet our whistle, to satisfy our palates. We're getting some core game modernizations, especially focused on the Zaitan fight. You know, what they're really doing, right, with this core game modernization is they're cleaning house. They're getting rid of some tech debt, right? If you're an engineer, you know, as you work on features, things get left behind, and it builds up over time. And so to go back, clean up a lot of the stuff in the core game, bring it up to the modern standards that they've have set for themselves is really good, because if you are going to have players rush through, they're going to play Guild Wars 3 or they're playing Guild Wars Reforged and they want a taste of, they want more Guild Wars, what's the next logical thing? They're going to go to Guild Wars 2, right? And you need to have a solid core game, because that's where they're starting, right? They're going to start in core Tyria, free to play, and if that is good, if the core game is solid, they're gonna pay the money. They're going to buy the expansions and continue playing Guild Wars 2. So getting rid of that tech debt is paramount for them, and they recognize that. And so I'm not mad at them for not releasing another expansion in 2027. The next thing is they're doing the same thing they did with PvP, but for World v World. And so they're going to be working with the community to build a new World v World battleground, a new map that's going to start off as a very rough concept with, no texture, very little textures, block assets, and work with the community to get it right. I think they learned from their mistakes, which is good. When the Red BL came out, right, people were not very thrilled, right? I've heard stories. I wasn't around when that happened, but they're getting better. They're learning. And so with the community hand in hand, they're going to get a new battleground map. And so in 2027, 2028, we may actually see a World v World landscape where we have 3 different maps. And that's huge, right? Because like right now, blue and green BLs are pretty much the same. There's no difference to them. And so in order to, it's going to be different. It's going to change the landscape, keep it fresh, maybe revitalize, keep the World v Worlders more engaged, because unfortunately, like, that is probably one of the biggest game modes in Guild Wars 2 next to open world, right? Like, don't get me wrong, open worlders love doing the metas, being out there, but when it comes to like more organized, more community based interactions, I think World v World takes the cake as the number one, right? Like, if we're talking about like guild collaboration, guild gameplay, World v World is, unbeat. And then lastly, we're getting that Ore prequel map, so that way that ties in Guild Wars 2 into the new game, so that way the lore, it all matches, it all makes sense, and that way it gets us a sneak peek into what Guild Wars 3 is going to be a little early. We can learn a little bit more about Ore, right? There hasn't been a need for me personally to go back, and so they're gonna have events go back to Ore, kind of get excited, build some of that hopium, build some of that excitement into Guild Wars 3 for that release. Then Guild Wars 3, it's our biggest unknown. There's a lot of things that we just do not know yet, right? And people are hungry for it. People are craving Guild Wars 3 news. The whole goal is to reach a new audience, right? It's going to be the first Guild Wars MMO that's going to have native console support. It's going to be released on the PlayStation 5, and it's going to be action combat, and there's a lot of nuance to that, right? So by way of being built for a console, you can kind of insinuate a little about what Guild Wars 3 may be. Because you're actively focusing on development for a console, you're constrained in really in buttons, right? Like you only have so many buttons to do so many things. You have modifiers and stuff like that, but you know, you don't want to have to like press 2-3 modifiers to get to a skill, right? That just kind of feels bad. That's kind of how this Guild Wars 2 on the Steam Deck is, where you're pressing modifiers to activate your utility skills and stuff like that. And so I think what we're gonna see is a simpler game not in terms of challenge, not in terms of gameplay, but in terms of the combat and how you interact with the game. Because it's going to be on console, I can see less skills, right? They may not be 10 skills of Guild Wars 2. There may not be 8 skills that Guild Wars 1 has. It may go the route of like the latest Harry Potter game, where you have 4 skills, right? You have 4 skills and you can swap them in and out, right? And that's how you interact. That could be a possibility, right? I played it on PC, and Hogwarts Legacy I thought was a very fun interactive game. There was movement involved, the combat was engaging, you felt powerful, and so I wouldn't be surprised if we see, I'm not saying it's going to be a 1-for-1, but just to get an idea, that could be a real possibility. I don't know, but I think that's the biggest thing that people are looking for in news for Guild Wars 3 is, what is the combat gonna look like? Because that is gonna be such a big defining part of the game. Guild Wars has been a core pillar, is having engaging combat. You know, Guild Wars 2 is probably my favorite combat system and out of any MMO. And I'm hoping that Guild Wars 3, I hope I meld with it. I hope I vibe with the combat that they're going to release, and you know, we'll just have to see, right? But the biggest things is Guild Wars 3 is following their core principles. So it's going to be a buy to pay, no subs, like all the things that we praise Guild Wars 2 for is going to get carried into Guild Wars 3. And that's just like, that was almost a freebie. That was a known given, but because they never said it until that live stream, you know, it was still up in the air. But I do believe Guild Wars 3 is going to capture a lot of market share, right? There is a lot of MMOs closing up shop, and having a more action combat oriented MMO, I think, is going to really entice some of the newer MMOs that have closed up shop to come to Guild Wars 3. It's going to be more based in fantasy. I think it has a real potential to just capture the current market share in the MMO community, but also entice a lot of new players who may have not played MMOs in the past, because they are console gamers or whatever, you know, play Guild Wars 3. Lastly, we have the Mistbound card game, which I was like, after looking at it, I was super hyped. I was a huge fan of Hearthstone, right? In college, loved Hearthstone. The TGC phase kind of wore off on me, but when I saw this, I was actually like really interested in the gameplay, because it's not just a classic TGC. If you look on the image on the top right, it has almost like a chessboard, a checkerboard, and you're able to place your cards, your minions on those pieces, right? So there's almost a positioning strategy to Misbound that can create some really interesting gaming scenarios, right? It's not just, hey, I'm gonna play this card, it's gonna attack XYZ, they're gonna block, right? There's gonna be a little bit more strategic elements to this. And so I'm really hoping that it goes well in the China market, and that it's not too buy to play, and so that way they feel compelled to release it to the external market. But this is a completely new market for the Guild Wars franchise, and so if anything, even if it's just the China market, what it could do is get more players in China exposed to the Guild Wars name, which then will bolster the China servers in Guild Wars 2 and Guild Wars, right? Like this is only can be a good thing. TGCs aren't that expensive to develop, and it's in collaboration with NCSoft and Bilibili. And so like I hope it goes well. I hope it goes well. And then to put a bow on everything and wrap it all up, you know, the biggest thing that I saw in the last few months was ArenaNet was putting the partner back in ArenaNet partnerships. And what do I mean by that is that, you know, we're seeing a lot more activity from ArenaNet partners, and that's fantastic, right? Because for years, I think ArenaNet partners kind of, they would be partners, but they were kind of like in their own corner of the ArenaNet sphere, right? Doing their own thing, you know, like Teapot would do tournaments, Sneb would do their stuff, but it seems like there is a much more intentional collaboration between the partners and the ArenaNet partners and ArenaNet to create actual marketing material, actual content that is really, you know, it's only going to be beneficial, right? Because if you're bringing your audience to their social media, right? So, you know, they're doing Twitch streams where they're, you know, Muckluck has been on there, Sneb has been on there, they're doing feature demos like Fridays. I've seen they've played the Raid LFG quick plays, they've done the Fractal quick plays, right? This Saturday, the Guild Wars tournament is going to be played on the Guild Wars stream itself, right? Like, these are like huge things that is really just showing that they care about their partners, that they want to have a better relationship with their partners, using them in what the creators do best, and that is marketing, outreach, building that community. And when it comes to social media collabs, like if you're on Instagram, if you're on YouTube Shorts, whatever, if you're following the Guild Wars 2 Instagram, right, you see the ArenaNet partners on those pages, right? They're doing collaborative promotions for Guild Wars 2, and that's like fantastic, right? Crew's Play Your Way video on YouTube was phenomenal to bring new players to help expound and elaborate on the different systems that Guild Wars 2 had in a way that made it whimsical. You know, you get a little taste, and then you just I want to know more about that aspect. I want to know a little bit more about that aspect. And you kind of find the things that you're going to be interested in the Guild Wars 2, then that's what makes you download it. That's what gets you into the Guild Wars 2 pipeline, or the ArenaNet pipeline as a whole. It all is just bringing it together. And I think these pillars, these 4 things, is what's going to create the success for ArenaNet if they continue to put the tender loving care into each of them. 2027 and 2028 are going to be defining moments for the franchise. I'm looking forward to seeing what we have in store for us. And I hope they succeed, because, you know, I love this game. I love it.